Welcome back to another episode of the DD Geopolitics podcast. I am joined once again by Lydia, finally, and a man that really doesn't need much of an introduction. IR and security analysis, an analyst, and Navy vet, Mark Sleboda. How are you, Mark? So nice to have you back.
Sarah, Lydia, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on Double D Geopolitics.
Double D's. Lydia, how are you? I know you've had a tough couple weeks.
Yes, well, it's been definitely a difficult week for everyone, for all of us. Difficult and terrifying, and we're going to talk about it. And something that I guess we could get started with is that for a while now, I feel like not a lot of things were happening in the conflict in Ukraine. But then last week, everything started happening all at once. And among those things was the announcement, the official announcement that a lot of people were waiting for from Russia, that the Ukrainian offensive has failed and is over. And Russia has started its offensive operations. And so, Mark, we wanted to ask you, and first of all, I want to tell you something which you're probably aware of, but our listeners love you so much for your realistic approach to things, and they can't wait to hear your thoughts. And so the question is, what do you think are the immediate plans of Russia in this offensive in Ukraine right now? Let's say the next month or couple of months. How do you see that?
Okay, so first I'd like to say that, although a lot of us maybe had the impression that not a lot was going on, say for the last 3 or 4 weeks, there of course was a lot going on. The Kiev regime forces were making their last gasp effort in the kill box that they had walked into between Robotyne and Verboya. They then tried this strange last-ditch effort to instead broaden towards the west, towards Kopani, where they also, met with similar levels of defense and resistance, and haven't had any success there as well. And also, the Kiev regime, for whatever strange military PR logic they're operating under, is apparently going to make a contested crossing of the Dnieper, an amphibious assault, across the river. Russia has been pounding the far bank of the Kherson River for about 3 weeks now, maybe 4. Obviously, they got word of it. We didn't really have any indication. The first indication that we had was when the artillery and the FABs started going off on the far side of Kherson, in the towns stretched along the Dnieper, just continuously. And there's only, of course, one reason for that. We also learned that in some type of typically puerile attempt to play this up to the Western, particularly the American audience, they renamed 2 of their units there, Normandy and Omaha. Yeah, because that's what Banderite fascists do, is they cosplay the Americans in World War II. Russia has been also hunting down the small boats they obviously intend to be using for this, provided by the United States, with Lancets and other drones. It apparently is still going forward. We haven't seen, we've only seen these small contests for islands on the Dnieper, and this very small crossing at the Cossack camps, Kazachi Lagry, for the last month. A very, very small foothold, also under the Antonovsky Bridge. But the terrain there, of course, is not suitable for any type of mechanized, breach, a beachhead on the other side of the Kherson. So not that they would be capable of transporting that across the boat. So we don't know where that's going yet, or but expect some strange last ditch effort, I guess, to claim a some other victory, because the main offensive completely failed. But there's been something going on there, something very heavy. And then, of course, the Russian local offensive, Kupiansk-Liman, has been slowly but steadily progressing for over a month now. So what we've seen is the Kiev regime, one by one, all of the axes that they had launched as part of their offensive falter until the last one was left, and that one being the one towards first Reboltina, then Verbolia, then shift over to Kopani, and that has also now died a death. And I think for the last 2 weeks, Russia has been launching small counterattacks all over, just probing, right? Reconnaissance and force, if you will, kind of poking the corpse of the Kiev regime's offensive and saying, "Are you dead yet? Can we go? Are you dead?" And now it's clear they're dead. Even the genocidal maniac Kirill Budanov, came up with this. It's off schedule. Their offensive is off schedule. That's the great euphemism he came up to, and then just told you read into it what you want, out of some type of insipid frustration. So now Russia has launched counterattacks everywhere along the contact line, essentially everywhere. And I would say that the two most important spots, quite obviously, are Avdiivka and Novomykhailova. They've had some problems in Mikhailova. They were able to demine the one side. I can't remember whether it was the north or the south, but they demined one of the approaches to the city they plan on taking, but they didn't finish the demining of the other one. Obviously the US was able to detect Russia's demining equipment, and they hit it with HIMARS several days in succession. So Russia lost, I believe it was 2 Zmei Goriniches, the Russian line charge throwers, and they also lost one of their the UR6, one of their demining robots, an automatic demining. When I say a robot, it's like 6 tons. It's a pretty substantial robot, but it's a pretty cool little thing. Very pretty multitasking, not just as a demining unmanned vehicle, but as a general combat engineering. It can do quite a lot. But anyway, we lost one of them. So that approach has stalled, and they're going to have to finish demining there. I don't know if they're bringing something up, what they've got planned there. But I would say that the goal is Russia wants to take Avdiivka by winter, right? By the new year. I think that is the plan. Whether they'll be able to accomplish that or not, I don't know. Of course, there's no way to take Avdiivka head on. That is the fortress city of Ukraine, right? It makes Bakhmut look like, a nut compared to a soft peach. It is, they've built it up for 10 years. It is the most heavily defended area. Actually, it's not where most of the shelling of Donetsk city itself has come from. There's several other settlements in the area that most of the setting of Donetsk city, but Avdiivka has been used to shell some of the towns, small cities on the outskirts of Donetsk city. So it is a redoubt, and it is being used to shell the DNR. And it has long been, and they've got some 15 to 20,000 troops there. And of course, much more than just the city, there is a city under the city, right? There is extensive Soviet era factories built there that were all built with, nuclear proof bunkers underneath, very extensive, underneath all the factories, like Azovstal, except a lot more of them. And these have all been expanded into a very large tunnel network by the Kiev regime over the past decade that they've had control of the area, or Ukraine in general. So Russia has their it's going to be difficult. Russia's already taken casualties. It's not Bradley Square level casualties, but they are charging with hundreds of tanks, and you can make the argument that this is the first real offensive that Russia has made since the early days of the conflict, since Mariupol, because Bakhmut was primarily Wagner. So people are making the argument that this is the first, real offensive that Russia has made, the Russian army. So we'll see what they have learned in the meantime. But right now, from what I've heard, the artillery mismatch is really heavy. And that is extremely inhibiting for the Kiev regime forces. The goal is to surround the city, to cut it off, to create a full cauldron. And it's very hard to tell right at the moment where Russian forces are in the formation of that cauldron. We've heard various claims about some of the satellite settlements to the north and northwest of Avdiivka, about the progress there. There's heavy fighting. The last I heard, Russian forces had taken a Coke plant, not Coca-Cola, right? Okay. We're talking the mineral type. That is an important height that basically give a complete targeting view of all of Avdiivka and the surrounding settlements. But then the Kiev regime used what artillery they had left and forced a Russian withdrawal. That was probably 24 hours ago, and I haven't heard definitively what's going on yet. So I'll consider it in the gray zone until I hear otherwise. But Russia is generally, in the course of this new offensive, making some gains. They are not dramatic gains. And a lot of people, with the amount of armor, Russia's throwing hundreds, maybe over 1,000 tanks into this. I've heard some Russian commentators say that at times it almost seems like every single Russian troop, soldier, has his own tank. So much for the Western propaganda that Russia's out of tanks or suffered thousands of tanks damage earlier in the conflict. Also disinformation. But the fighting is very heavy, and Russia is going to take casualties among both manpower and gear. Tanks, armored vehicles, in this, because they are on the offensive. And there's two truisms that we have learned from this conflict. Is one, surprise is almost impossible at the strategic level and still very, very hard at the tactical level, because both sides are using satellites, right? Both sides are using extensive drone reconnaissance. Surprises is very hard. But I think Avdiivka came as more of a surprise than anything else that we've seen in this conflict so far. And the other one is that offense is hard. even when Russia has overwhelming advantages, when they're going into an urban area or a fortified area, or even worse, a fortified urban area, whatever advantages Russian has, just like any one on the offense, are going to be reduced, if not completely nullified, and the casualties will mount. So expect Russian casualties to climb much more significantly now than they have been for months while the Kiev regime was on the offensive. But I would say that the fact that Russia has completely stopped NATO's probably their best chance for an offensive, like dead flat. I mean, like no significant gains whatsoever, not even the slightest. I mean, it was just a slap in the face. And then immediately go on a significant counteroffensive. I think that is a cautious good sign about where the next year of this conflict is going. We know the incredible shortage of supplies that of not only NATO but even their allied countries have come up with even the New York Times admitting that Russia is outproducing all of NATO in artillery shells by 7 times. All of NATO. Russia is outproducing artillery shells by 7 times. New York Times, not my propaganda, but theirs. And similarly, Russia has increased the production of tanks, missiles, drones, Lancet drones, reconnaissance drones, everything. And we now have reports in the Western media that the first of the new supplies from North Korea have started arriving at the front line. Whether it's actually there or not, I seem to think it certainly is at least on the way. And so Russia seems comfortably supplied for another year or two, at the very least, of offensive at the same or higher firing rate, while the Kiev regime's stock of artillery will continue to diminish what they have available. That's why they're using cluster shells and 155 millimeter jacket, because the U.S. has nothing else to provide. And they have already looted their stockpiles in both South Korea, which is why Russia had no problems turning to North Korea. South Korea has gone into it. But also the U.S. 300,000 artillery shells that the U.S. had stashed in Israel for both their or Israel's use in case of an emergency. They raided that last year. It's already long gone. And lo and behold, there's an emergency in Israel. They need artillery shells. So they also desperately need air interceptor missiles, and the U.S. is already short of them. So the attack by Hamas was obviously, at least in part, very carefully timed to exploit this supply problem. And whatever the U.S. may claim, they cannot supply Ukraine and Israel with many vital supplies like artillery shells, like air defense missiles at the same time. They can't even supply Ukraine with them. So things are starting to get interesting. Of course, they're also starting to bring us ever closer to direct conflict between Russia and the U.S., or between the U.S. and Israel and Iran, some type of second major conflict that is, right, shall we say, on the margins of the existing one, which is really not good for any of us, but it does certainly make for, interesting times.
Before I ask you the next question, I have to ask from our audience, what is they said, what creature lurks behind Mark? And that's
yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not in the studio today. That is my 4 rescue crows.
Oh my God, they're right. Someone said, "Is that a crow?" Yes.
Yeah, it's Eurasian crows, right? They're gray and black all across, Russia and parts of Europe. None of them can fly properly. They're all rescued from my local woods. I'm a geek birder. Crows happen to be my favorite because they're more intelligent than most people that I've met in my life. I've got one of them actually. Remember where I get
Exciting.
is underneath my table right now. This is Morrigan. She's our first one. She was actually born with a malformed legs, or they developed that way in the nest. So we rescued her right from being pushed out of the nest, basically. And she's now 3-4 years old, going on 4, and she's a sweetheart. But
She's
she hops
adorable.
on her little knees, basically, and she lives a pretty happy life with our dogs and now the 3 other rescue crows that all have some types of wing or leg injuries. So that's our 2 Shar-Pei is our zoo.
Well, I saw your Shar-Pei. I used to have a Shar-Pei, but now that we've had a nice breath, we'll get back into the horrible things. So the elephant in the room, Israel-Palestine. You were in the Navy, I was in the Navy. People keep kind of asking me about these carriers. So at first we moved the Ford there, and I said, all right, well, that's kind of normal to have a boat out there. It's not a big deal. But now they're moving the Ike out there. And then yesterday, something strange happened, which I want your opinion on, is that the Ford pulled ahead of its strike group and was pretty much alone and went forward onto Israel while the small boys held back. Why do you think that would happen? And then I want to get even deeper into the conflict.
Well, we do know that within this carrier strike group, there are several special forces that are, as from my understanding, already in Gaza. Several units of U.S. Special Forces that are there working with the Israeli forces right now to recover some hostages. And at least from the first word I heard today, they recovered some bodies, which means they were not successful. But of course, with U.S. boots on the ground in Gaza, that vastly increases the chances of the escalation of this conflict to a major regional confrontation. I still believe that the carriers are there primarily as deterrent. They are meant particularly as a message to Syria and Iran not to get involved. They know that the carriers are not going to work when it comes to Hezbollah. That's not going to deter Hezbollah. But I also think that the U.S. probably does not want to become a major theater of escalation either. The potential for escalation with Russia is definitely there. Russia does not certainly want an escalation in Syria, but they've got bases there. And we've already seen Israel hitting Damascus airport pretty hard. Russia does have substantial air defense assets in Syria, in Tartus and elsewhere that can be turned on and provide in an area in an A2AD area that is probably even capable of stopping the F-35. Russia has not done so yet, right? If they shot down Israeli planes that were firing on Damascus, which they have not done for years. But these attacks on the airport, this isn't taking pot shots at Hezbollah or Iran within Syrian borders, which Russia more or less acquiesced to, right, to avoid a direct conflict with Israel over the last 8 years now. But obviously Israel crossed a red line, and what's more, they crossed a red line with regards to Iran bringing, well, whatever they were bringing. There were Iranian planes that were prevented with these strikes from landing at Damascus airport. So without Syria probably almost certainly does not want to, maybe they would like to get involved in this, but there's no love lost between the Syrian government and Hamas, because in the course of the proxy war against Syria, Hamas joined the other side, and fighters from Hamas were fighting the Syrian government, potentially even fighting Russian forces in Syria. Now, of course, Syria still supports, the Syrian government still supports, in theory, Palestinian sovereignty and independence and statehood. But let's face it, Syria does not need a resumption or a beginning of direct conflict with Israel or the United States right now. The U.S. still controls Syria east of the river, including all of Russia's oil and wheat fields, and Turkey, that forever quixotic player, is still camped out in all of northern Syria and has given no signs of ever intending to release that territory. So Syria is crippled right now, and without Syria able to enter the fray, that vastly reduces the potential allies that the Palestinians have to call on. And with Syria not involved, power projection for Iran becomes almost impossible. Iran can't project power into Palestine without Syria there. Hezbollah is just not going to cut it, not alone. And Hezbollah, of course, is a much more effective fighting force than Hamas, although give Hamas credit with, whatever brutality that we saw there, that was some positively Mission Impossible shit. I mean, paragliders, amphibious assaults, FPV drones taking out robotic machine gun emplacements. That was impressive. That no one thought Hamas was capable of that, but that, I guess, is part of the whole racism of the way that Israel and the West look at Hamas, right? As we know, they said human animals. That's what Palestinians are, human animals. Well, those human animals just gave the IDF and Mossad a bloody nose that they won't ever forget. And this was with a tiny fraction of the force that Israel has, with a tiny fraction of the military, an infinitesimal fraction of the military supplies. But I think that Hamas is even smarter than that because of the timing. The timing when Israel will find it very difficult. They will need artillery if Hezbollah enters the fray. Right now, they don't need artillery so much. But if Hezbollah enters the fray, they only have to hold Hezbollah. They don't have to invade Lebanese territory, which will make it more difficult for Hezbollah to be on the offensive than we saw in the early 2000s. It will be a different type of story. But they will still need artillery, so it will make it difficult for them. But the other part of the timing is a much more, shall we say, overtly political, geopolitical issue. Saudi Arabia was about, as far as we know, to reach a normalization agreement with Israel that has been pushed hard by the United States, by the Biden administration. It was put forward first by Trump, and then Biden has picked it up. And they were the sweetener for the deal was the U.S. was going to provide a security guarantee relationship with Saudi Arabia that's basically akin to the one the U.S. has with Israel, right? The sweet deal on military supplies, military aid, the top intelligence sharing, training, the whole 9 yards. And Mohammed bin Salman, his foreign policy has vastly matured, and Saudi Arabia has joined BRICS. They've joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization as a dialogue partner. They're, obviously reaching out to China. This talk of abandoning the dollar in favor of the Chinese currency and in oil trade there. Lots of things. The rapprochement, the crazy rapprochement with Iran that just, I think completely inverts a pillar of the geopolitics of our world and makes me believe we're living in an alternate reality already. We just had the president of Iran and the crown prince of Saudi Arabia have a phone call yesterday and issue a statement jointly condemning the siege and ultimately, of course, the cleansing of Gaza. That's strange. But Saudi Arabia is not going to abandon, the U.S. completely. They want a multi-vector foreign policy with options, and the U.S. was presenting them with a sweet deal with regards to Israel. And it's been de facto for decades. The U.S. Geopolitical structure for hegemony of the Middle East was a tripod with the U.S. at top, and then a hub and spoke relationship with Saudi on one side and Israel on the other. And that was targeted at Iran as the glue holding that together. Of course, with the Iran-Saudi suddenly normalization of diplomatic relations and Saudi ending the failed war in Yemen, that tripod was just about to collapse, and the U.S. was trying to shore that up by pushing through this normalization deal with Israel. I think Hamas realized very well that if that normalization deal went through and Saudi recognized Israel, that would also recognize it within its existing borders and the settling, throughout Palestine, throughout the West Bank. And that would be de facto dissolving any Arab support left or even hope of support of Palestine. And where Saudi goes, the rest of the Gulf goes. Some of the Gulf has already, of course, normalized relations, but the rest would have followed. And that would have been an existential geopolitical event for Palestine, right? I think they're doomed anyway, to be perfectly honest. I don't want to be too fatalist there, but Russia and China and even Iran cannot power project there. And the political sentiment in the US and the EU right now is echoing the genocide rhetoric coming out of Israel. So I think that Palestine will become very soon certainly out of the Gaza, a diaspora people, much like the Jews once were before they came back from Europe and US and the former Soviet Union and colonized Palestine. But Hamas has averted that. They have averted that immediate geopolitical crisis, at least for them, for now. And we have the word that Saudi has at least, has indefinitely shelved that normalization deal. And with what's going to happen over the next couple of months as they start to cleanse Gaza, and enter conflict with Hezbollah, it's going to get much bloodier on all sides. And Saudi Arabia will find it, even if they wanted to, domestically, politically impossible for them to normalize relations with Israel. So I think that was Hamas' real goal with all of this. That's my reading, because just to kill some Israeli civilians and military, steal some military assets. Yes, that was great. They had people pre-positioned when they broke into the garrisons and basins whose only job was to run in and grab everything and drag it back to Gaza. They had a whole logistics force set up for that. So, they got some 40 armored vehicles, lots of ammunition, shells, everything. But and they got a number of hostages. That's a mixed bag because it's as much of a blessing as it is a curse. They intend to use it to trade back for the 5,000 plus Palestinians that are held, imprisoned by the Israeli government. Hamas regards those as hostages. But that's not enough. That is not enough to justify the expenditure of resources. Everything Hamas had, they threw into this. And they were never going to be able to hold territory, but it was a very successful and dramatic raid that made Israel bring the hammer down on Gaza. And we know that Netanyahu had actually facilitated Hamas control of Gaza. He thought he had Hamas under control, manageable, and that by having them be the public face of the Palestinian resistance, that he was they were effectively demonized and marginalized. And that one came back to bite him hard. So I believe that Hamas's real goal was to force Israel to make such a response that would force Saudi to end this normalization process with Israel, and also, potentially to attempt to incite the Arab and even the Islamic world to remind them that Palestine still exists, that the Palestinian people still exist in Palestine, but may not for much longer. And right now, there's a crisis throughout the region. A lot of these Arab governments that are effectively vassals of the U.S. of the West, like Jordan, they could face a severe domestic crisis because the people will demand involvement. They're already storming over the fences to try to come to the Palestinians' aid there. It's going to destabilize the whole region potentially. God knows what's going to happen in Lebanon. We know what Hezbollah will do, but we don't know what the rest of the Lebanese government and so on. So this is another potential huge crisis. And I mean, there's clear lines of connection between the events here and what's happening in the Ukraine, more than just Zelensky, trying to save some of his military supply, which obviously now is going to be re-diverted to Israel. And any type of Zelensky has evidently been demanding a personal tour of Israel to remind everyone that Ukraine still exists. I don't think the Israelis are interested at all. They're like, go away.
He's going there to go shopping. He wants to go shopping.
I think Zelensky, the videos, he had the look of a jilted lover, like a lover who has been put aside for a hotter, younger thing. I don't have any sympathy for the man, but if I did, it would be tragic.
It was a difficult week for him, for sure. For all of us, but especially for him.
Oh, yeah. He's really suffering. We should take a moment of silence for Zelensky. All right. That's enough.
No.
That's good.
That will do.
That'll do it. You know what's interesting to me about when, for the West, the Middle East is such a blind spot. Even for some people that do geopolitical analysis, it's difficult to really get into the intricacies of the Middle East.
Full disclosure, I am not a Middle East expert.
No, none of us are.
Right.
But
So, yeah,
I just think that it's really interesting that this, we'll call it a conflict for now. I guess it's kind of a war. Bibi did declare war. Yeah. But we're getting to see where the alliances and allegiances lie. So Iran immediately went into diplomatic travels. Their foreign minister went to Iraq, Lebanon, and Syria. This is right after Israel bombed Syria's airports. I believe he landed at the Russian air base. Um, Iraq traveled to Lebanon,
And to Russia.
and Russia. And
Also.
the Taliban, now see, if we first thought it was a joke, but it is official and they've asked again today. The Taliban has asked for safe passage for non-Arab Muslims to travel back to Palestine. Not saying that that will happen, but it's just interesting to see the different kind of the Muslim world coming together, but also like pragmatism and like hesitancy, or I don't know. It's just a very interesting dynamic. And then the UAE being the Gulf, always being a wild card, saying that they stand with Israel and allowing flights to take off from there to rearm Israel. So it's just a really interesting way. I didn't expect that from Saudi, that you already discussed. I didn't expect Oman to stand with Palestine, and they did. The Gulf countries get really strange. So I think that that's been kind of interesting. But I'm glad that you said genocidal languages. So what we've seen today is Israel has attacked Hezbollah and has attacked the southern areas of Lebanon and has killed 2 civilians, killed 2 elderly people, and a reporter. That was yesterday. Where, like, there's no response. Are we gonna do, what is it, 2014 all over again, where Israel just commits war crimes everywhere and nobody's?
I mean, much more than that. I mean, this is complete green light. I mean, the Europe has made it clear that Israel can do whatever they want as long as they get it done as quick as they can. I mean, there will be no cry. I mean, right now throughout Europe, simply flying the Palestinian flag is now, an imprisonable offense. You cannot post anything pro Hamas on Meta now. The United Kingdom has outlawed pro Palestinian protests. I mean, they are obviously, this is the laying out the map, and we've heard from the Israeli military, from the IDF chiefs, that there will be no war crimes consideration for Israeli troops. That we know there never has been. The U.S. will always shield them with the veto, but I mean, there's no outcry from that from the United States. When the leader of the IDF, refers to Palestinians as human animals, and there's no reaction from the West. Much like with Russia now, all the masks are off, all the veneer of human rights, of values, it's all been cast to the side, and Palestinians are the new Russians now. Right?
I said that last night. Yeah,
it's okay to hate and kill Palestinians, just like with Russians. They're making this perfectly clear, not just with silence and not just with censorship, but actively, supporting Israel's actions in Gaza. So
let's talk about the propaganda if you want. Let's talk about the babies, the non-existent. So we've gotten a beheaded baby story, which was horrific to first hear about. We've now found out there's no proof of the babies. They don't exist. This story, you're in Moscow, but this story has polarized the United States. It has polarized the United States. And then today and yesterday, Israel bombs the evacuation routes. But we're still talking about beheaded babies that don't exist and arguing over this story.
1 million people move out of Gaza here, and then they bomb where they're supposed to be evacuating from.
Correct. And that's reported by the London Times. So it's not us making this up, but that's as far as it went. Last night I was having a discussion, and I said exactly what you said. I said, where were you guys a year and a half ago? That was the warm-up. Like, you won't see anything like this will be like nothing you've ever seen before. The way that the West will uphold Israel with the outlawing and the censorship, it's already started. It's terrifying over here. What is it like in Russia?
I mean, I think Russia, of course, is far more focused on Ukraine. There is, first of all, Russia does not love Hamas, right? Russia doesn't do Sunni Islamic radicals. Let's be frank about that. The Russian government is very much still pushing we are neutral, but at the same time pushing, the only sane position, which is that stop fighting, return to peace, return to diplomacy, and the only solution is the Palestinian state. Of course, simply mentioning a Palestinian state is already seen as anti-Israeli. That's certainly the way the Israeli government sees it. But I mean, there are figures in the West making claims that, of course, Hamas couldn't do this alone. The first one was Iran did it, and actually, quietly, the Biden administration and the Israeli government have both said that they see no signs of direct Iranian involvement in this Hamas's Operation Al-Aqsa flood, right? And if there was, they would probably certainly call it out for that, which I think the fact that they haven't is a sign, at least at an official level, that they don't want escalation to involve Iran. But that doesn't stop the political actors among the West screaming about Iranian involvement and screaming about Russian involvement. That this must be that was Zelensky's line, that Putin is behind it all. And it got to the point where even the Israeli ambassador to Ukraine came out and said, "This is nonsense. Russia has not been involved in this. Russia." I mean, they support Palestinian statehood, right? They support Palestinian sovereignty. They recognize a Palestinian state. That's a holdover from the Soviet Union. But they stopped all support, certainly to Gaza, with becoming the Russian Federation and Hamas getting control there. They talk to Hamas, but that Russia talks to everybody. So Russia's at a remove. And at least early last week, Russian state media was putting out to people, tone down on the anti-Israeli rhetoric. We're neutral there. Now, I think Putin's statements since then have actually changed.
I agree. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about this statement. So I got into an argument with somebody today about it. And he said that the siege of Gaza is just like the siege of Leningrad.
Yeah.
And I said, really interesting choice of words for Putin. And a couple people came after me and said, you're twisting it. You're twisting it. And I said, if you have even followed Putin for just the last 18 months, which
his family was there.
Correct. And I'm like, he chooses his words and his analogies extremely deliberately. Who sieged Leningrad and who is sieging Gaza?
Exactly.
And exactly. People argued he didn't say that. And I'm like, that's exactly what he said. That is what he said.
Can I please say something as a Russian, which is my role in this establishment? I'm the designated Russian person. But seriously, you are very correct, because Putin he doesn't choose to speak unless he's certain about what he wants to say. And when he does, when I listen or read what he says, I always take it on two levels. One, well, obviously, literally, what is he saying? But also, why is he saying what he is saying? Because there is always some type of a deeper meaning there, always. And so the fact that he said that, and that's, by the way, and I'm sure that a lot of our listeners will understand, that's a very powerful image for Russians, especially for the whole country. And for him, it's something that is not used lightly here. For him to actually use that analogy is very important, very serious, and extremely powerful.
Well, it gets lost on the West.
It's also not the Russian government, apologizing for Hamas. They've been very clear that Israel, as far as they say, has a right to response to terrorism, which is a joke, of course. This moral posturing from the West. it's completely different. That's an act of terrorism. Please, you literally, the West, the US, including Israel, literally supported head chopping, suicide bombing jihadists, terrorists in Syria, in Libya, in Afghanistan, and elsewhere. Terrorism only counts when the victim is a Westerner or an Israeli, if you don't consider them part of the West. I'm not in the Palestinian shoes, and I'm not particularly fond of the ideology of Islamism, political Islamism, any more than I am the ideology of Zionism. But I will never begrudge the Palestinian right to resist the occupation of their country and the genocidal ethnic cleansing that has been slowly, carried out on them. I'm not in their shoes. If I was, I would probably be a cold-blooded, bloody monster myself. If I was in their shoes, maybe worse than Hamas. They first of all, we know, as you pointed out, a lot of what they did, they killed some civilians. There's no question about that. Right? Israel kills Palestinian civilians every day. So on a simple level, that has very limited moral impact for me when the opponents are the ones using. I mean, the U.S. is the biggest supporter of terrorism in the world, repeatedly, in multiple conflicts, and supporting right-wing death squads for decades in South and Central America is the same thing, right? Killing civilians. So that doesn't bother me so much. But the Russian attitude towards the conflict is obviously changing with the threat of the cleansing, the genocide against Gaza. And that's interesting. And China has also made a very strong, surprisingly strong statement yesterday in support of Palestine and warning about, Israel and the West crossing the line here. So quietly, forces are aligning. Now, that does not mean that anyone necessarily is going to step in to prevent this, because they simply lack the military capability to do so. But it does mean that in the aftermath of this, there are going to be geopolitical repercussions for the West and for Israel for doing this. And it is further solidifying. I said Saudi and Iran, the leaders on a phone call agreeing on something and condemning, what is being done with open US and EU support. That's huge. That is a very, and Qatar as well. And Qatar and Saudi Arabia don't get along either. So good job, guys. You managed to get Iran and Saudi Arabia and Qatar to all agree on something against what you're doing. That it is a diplomatic.
Look at what Israel has done. They've brought the Arab world together, and they've united Americans in their warmongering.
Not just the Arab world. I mean, Iran, not even technically Arab. Right. Oh, and by the way, Lydia, yes, but you're not the only Russian here. Я российский гражданин. So
he's an
okay, my fellow Russian.
But what sucks about that analogy that Putin gave out is it's going to be completely lost on Western ears, because we use the most extreme.
It's not even going to be repeated.
They're
not reporting it.
Extreme analogies ever. So Hamas is now ISIS, and they're also Nazis, but Putin is also Hitler, and the Russians are also Nazis. So everything here is just extreme. So, I mean, I don't know if you guys heard, but yesterday we were warned not to go into well-populated cities because there would be terrorist attacks. We were told not to wear anything that identifies us as Jewish out in public. It is psychotic here. It is incredible. And
it's a madhouse. It's a madhouse.
I've never seen, it's worse than after 9/11.
May I just say, I am so very glad to be living in a sane country.
I know. What is it like to have a leader that like actually chooses his own words and like means what
Yeah,
he
can
says?
can sit down for 3 hours and debate international relations theory and world order? Sorry. I mean, I I respect the Chinese leader. I respect the leadership in Iran. I've never thought much of Assad, but he held out for a
Whoa, whoa,
decade. So
whoa, whoa, whoa. We'll talk about that another
yeah,
time.
yeah, yeah. Another time. But you know, I'm sorry, top leader in the world, hands down, at an intellectual level, at a strategic level, at a cold-blooded, patient. We'll bring it to you in our own time. We're not going to fall for your little provocations. I mean, thank God he's in charge of Russia, and not me, because he is able to separate himself emotionally from these things.
So before we end, which I don't want to end, but how did we go from we 2 or 3 weeks ago, time's not even a thing anymore, but 2 or 3 weeks ago we praised a Nazi. We gave him an award in a parliament, and then to now we're calling Hamas Nazis in order to condemn them. We got here. How have we done this? The mental gymnastics that it took to
Yeah,
get here.
Western propaganda is tying itself in knots right now, trying to. I mean, they still haven't even admitted that the Kiev regime's offensive is over, much less acknowledging that Russia has gone on a giant, huge offensive that they say that Russia shouldn't even be capable of, right? On top of all this Nazi stuff. And now, yeah, now the Palestinians are Nazis, of course. It is painful watching the twister body, I mean, we're talking, it's like body horror type um uh manipulations of the narrative there to try to keep it up. And it's amazing how quickly now they resort not just to the propaganda, but to outright censorship, banning of protests, everything. It is amazing. It
What's
is.
it like for you two? Because I know Russia is very in tune with their own history and keeping it accurate. What is it like for you two to just watch the complete historical illiteracy of the West as we celebrate Nazis and then support genocide all in 1 month? Lydia.
Oh, well, I don't even know how to tackle all of this because for me, as a Russian, when I look at it, the mildest way I can put it is I am shocked with how things like that are handled. A lot of the narratives that I see coming from the West are just insane to me. I actually said it in the chat last night that sometimes I feel like I'm living in some type of an alternative dimension because there is the history that I know, that I've been taught, also things that I've experienced myself based on you know my life and the places that I've visited, the experiences that I had with the people. And then there is some really strange narratives which I even have no idea how people reach those conclusions. And I feel like this past month has been so crazy as far as just the world events, the propaganda, the Canada experience that we all had, and we just only recovered from that, and we went through, straight to this. And this has been just the craziest display of propaganda. And to me, because and I'm sure that most Russians can relate to this, just what I've experienced in the past year and a half, and how quickly people can be demonized and how quickly people reach certain conclusions about things is just these days it's insane. It's terrifying.
Yeah, there's no other word. It's terrifying. So now we're at a not even an impasse, it's just absolute chaos. So today the time limit has run out for the hospital to evacuate and for the northern Gaza strip to evacuate. IDF is saying that full-scale invasion is imminent, and no other statements other than minor terrorist skirmishes in Syria and some issues with the southern border of Lebanon. How fast do you think this is going to happen, Mark? And what should we look for? And what, like, I just don't even know how to formulate the question, because I'm terrified, and I'm extremely worried about what's going to happen in the next couple days.
Yeah, I don't think I think we might see another few days before it starts. Obviously, they're going to focus on northern Gaza first, and then, once they've pushed people out of North Gaza, they intend to push them out of South Gaza. Presuming they clear North Gaza. From what there, Egypt has, of course, refused, mass numbers of refugees to be allowed to cross the border. And that's being done for two reasons. One, they do recognize that would be the end of Palestinian Gaza. That Israel would wholeheartedly, if they open that, just push them all out, right? That would just cleanse. So, in a way, while causing some personal suffering to Palestinians, they are also trying to, you could call it an attempt to save Palestine. On the other hand, the current Egyptian government does not like Hamas, right? Hamas is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, and this, is a military dictatorship in Egypt, whatever you want to, whatever the pretense since that came to power overthrowing the Muslim Brotherhood. So there's no love lost there. And actually, we heard early in the week that Egypt actually got word of this, and they tried to warn the Israeli government, Mossad, 10 days in advance, something is coming out of Gaza, and they were ignored. So Egypt has a very interesting role in all of this. But I think expect a few more days of prep, of coordination of plans with the U.S. and the IDF. Because, of course, U.S. intelligence will be instrumental, beyond just the special forces on the ground, but everything that they can give intelligence-wise to Israel will be done to help them to succeed with this as quickly as possible. And I don't think it will be easy for them, but they've 360,000 reservists on top of a 200,000 strong active duty military. They're very serious about this. Now, a large part of that, of course, will be to blocking Hezbollah, but they're pulling up all the stops. They intend to complete this now, and Netanyahu's political career is on the chopping block, with polls showing that most Israelis hold him responsible for what has happened, as they should. But his only chance is through some type of, enormous conflict that people forget that he was responsible for starting it and see it as the hero who won it. Otherwise, his political career is over. So he's got a personal thing in this. But I think we'll see a few days yet before they get underway. They do want as many civilians to get out as possible, because this is going to take time. They want to make it as quick as possible, but they do want to minimize the body count such that, not that they care about Palestinian lives, but they don't want Europe getting cold feet. They don't want Europe. The U.S. will never have cold feet, right? You could pile up Palestinian corpses from Tel Aviv to New York, and the U.S. wouldn't care.
No.
But they want to try to stop Europe from starting hand wringing when their populations start to see images of all the Palestinian children that will be pulled out of the rubble and from homes and whatnot. So I think a few more days of prep time. I don't think anyone's quite ready. You will see increasing amounts of raids first into Gaza, like we saw early today. I think we'll see more of this, shall we say, reconnaissance and force and attempts to recover some hostages. But I think definitely within a week, no longer than that.
A question from the audience, which I'm interested to hear your opinion. Why do you think these countries, she didn't specify which countries, but I guess it's all of them. Why do you think these countries allow themselves to be manipulated by the US and Israel?
Because the elites see it as in their personal best interests and the best interests of their country. I mean, it's in international relations theory, we call it bandwagoning, right? If you're talking, let's say countries like Jordan, right? Maybe even closer to the UK than the US, but certainly involved there. They in a world where there are regional threats and there are global threats, you often find it is not in your best interests to resist the hegemon, the top dog. It can cost you economically, it can cost you militarily, it can cost you politically. Russia is the only country in the world that has resisted the US the way it has. Every other country that has fallen afoul, Serbia, Syria, Libya, they all go, Iraq, they all go the way of the dodo. Russia has unique economic and military capabilities because of its geography, its history, its nuclear arsenal, as a deterrent, at least from a strategic assault, that it has luxuries that most other countries simply can't afford. And sometimes it is better to get in line with the dominant power rather than risk your country and its people. And sometimes for certain political elites, that become seen as a subordinate, authorities there, you want to say viceroys for the US, it can be personally profitable. I mean, look at Europe. Look how much, France used to have at least rhetorically an independent foreign policy from US hegemony. Look at the sea changes, how wedded Europe has become to US hegemony and to the, I would say, an equivalent supremacist ideology of exceptionalism of their own, right? You want to, instead of American exceptionalism, call it European or Western exceptionalism. But this generation of EU foreign policy elite, all of this talk of Joseph Borrell about garden and jungle, Europe is a garden, the rest of the world is a jungle, which obviously represents a way a significant percent of the EU foreign policy elite thinks now. That is word for word. That is book titles by Robert Kagan. Look it up. I mean, we've heard numerous EU leaders, Joseph Borrell, Annalena Baerbock, the foreign minister of Austria, they quote Robert Kagan, the arch U.S. neocon, the husband of Victoria Nuland,
of our monster. Yeah, that's
chapter and verse, right? They quote him. The entire EU foreign policy elite right now has been mentally colonized by U.S. neocons. They fully believe it, right? People are shocked. How could Germany just allow Nord Stream to be destroyed? Because there was a changing of the political guard. I mean, first of all, Schroeder. Then Merkel was, okay, if German business wants it, I guess I'll agree to it. Now you have the German elite in power that didn't want it built in the first place and want it destroyed because they believe in U.S. hegemony. Like, they believe in it, right? They think that they can be the moral guide to a better U.S. dominated world with just the right nudges, right? That's the way they see themselves. And they quote Robert Kagan, chapter and verse. That's the world we're living in. In that case, it's not bandwagoning out of interests. The EU foreign policy elite is ideologically in bed with the very worst U.S. neocons right now.
That's terrifying.
They believe in their moral superiority over Russia, over China, over Iran, over the Palestinians. They are incapable, much like the U.S. has always been, of seeing their own hypocrisies.
Do you think you want to try to end on a positive note? I don't know if I've ever ended up.
What have I ever done that? What have I ever done? Russia is going to win this conflict eventually.
I mean, that's
it will be an ugly victory, and it won't look like what you
still
hope.
Can't even end on a positive note.
Okay, we'll just let's just keep it at Russia's gonna win. Okay.
Yeah. No, Mearsheimer called it an ugly victory. I think it was perfect. I mean, because he's right where I am. I think.
You're both incredible realists, except he's nowhere near as black-pilled as you. You are so black-pilled.
Can I just say my favorite phrase
for the Russian offensive?
Okay, Mark, I'll be with you.
Hey, by the way, the Black Sea Fleet had to retreat to Novorossiysk. Did you see that?
We're okay. I want to be positive here a little bit, but Mark, but I want to say my favorite phrase, because people accuse me, and as you know, like most Russians have been accused, they accuse me of not being optimistic or positive enough, and I always say that a pessimist only has nice surprises in life. So that's how I feel. So we'll just be kind of carefully optimistic, and Russia is gonna win. That's for sure.
My favorite expression that is one of the guiding pillars of my life was a little philosophical conversation about hope, and if you want to say the cynic said that hope is the carrot dangled in front of the mule to keep him plodding along. And then the response, are you saying we shouldn't hope? And the philosopher's response, I'm saying, is you should remove the carrot and walk forward with your eyes open.
Beautiful.
Well, it's been amazing, Mark. Tell our listeners where they can find you and where your next appearances are going to be.
Yeah. Okay. So everyone, you can take the black pill out of your mouth now. This conversation is over.
Yeah, it's Saturday. Try to have a good day after this.
Really, I believe in Russia victory eventually. So I'm not that black pill. But anyway, you can follow me first of all on Telegram, right? Mark Sleboda, or The Real Politic with Mark Sleboda. You can find it. The links are everywhere. Follow Telegram, you get everything. My Substack, also The Real Politic with Mark Sleboda. It is free for everyone, and I put at least one of my radio. I do 3, 4, 5 radio interviews a day, particularly on Sputnik. I put at least one up there a day during the week anyway. I'm also on Twitter. I'm on YouTube. Not as active there as I have been because of the radio and other commitments, but I'd like to get it back up. And technically, I guess I'm still on Facebook. If anyone under 70,
no,
yeah,
nobody's on Facebook anymore.
Yeah, Telegram, Substack, Twitter, YouTube. Yeah.
Thank you, and thank you to all of our listeners, and thank you to Lydia. Tomorrow's episode, tentatively, fingers crossed, will be our friend from Gaza. We have Steve Sweeney on Wednesday and Scott Ritter whenever he decides to show up. Check out.
Russia's going to win 2 weeks from now.
2 weeks from now. Check out Mark's.
Ritter is the opposite of me.
Check out Mark's appearance on Jimmy Dore last night. And shout out to Amon and Yemen. Please don't forget about Yemen. They still need us. You can donate to our project in Yemen at ddgeopolitics.com. It has been an amazing episode. And thank you all again.
Thank you, Sarah and Lydia.